Hey y'all, it's Pastor Daniel coming to y'all from our front porch now because our back deck is still a little bit wet from all of the bad weather. Hope everybody is safe from that and unharmed. I hope you had a good Easter weekend. Obviously, Easter weekend is when we remember Jesus' resurrection from the dead. Christmas gets a lot of press. We talk a lot about Christmas, that Christmas is very widely celebrated in our country, but really, for Christians, historically, for the last 2,000 years, and in most other places in the world, Easter, the resurrection, is the thing that we celebrate the most as believers. That Jesus rose from the dead, that he defeated death and sin and the devil. In some senses, um, every Sunday that we go to church is a celebration. It's like a mini Easter, is a celebration of Jesus' resurrection. Everything that the church is and everything that Christianity is about revolves around Jesus rising from the dead. Paul actually says in 1 Corinthians, if Jesus hasn't risen from the dead, then we should just shut it all down. If I have only hoped in Jesus in this life, then I of all men am most to be pitied. Those are heavy words. Usually we think about the resurrection as like a sweet thought, something you say to somebody at a funeral, something that's written on a Hallmark card to say, hey, you're going to see your grandma again. Like this is not the end of the story. When in reality, the resurrection is like a bomb going off. As much as this pandemic feels like it has flipped everything upside down, turned everything on its head, the resurrection does that even more so, because the ripple effect that we feel now, we still feel 2,000 years later, and it is spread throughout the entire world. People who are convinced that Jesus, on the third day after he was crucified and clearly dead, rose again in his body. That's a crazy thing to believe, but it's something that has just flipped the world upside down and changed the culture of of the entire planet in so many different ways. So we're going to focus on the resurrection this week, just kind of do some different thoughts about it. And the first thing that I want us to focus on is hope. Christianity has faith, hope, and love as these three things that are repeated over and over and over again. And hope is very central to the Christian story. This is what Paul writes in Romans 8, verses 18 to 25. He says this, "For I consider that the sufferings of this present time are not worth comparing with the glory that is to be revealed to us." Those are big words. The sufferings of this present time are not worth comparing to the glory that is to be revealed to us. For the creation waits with eager longing for the revealing of the sons of God. For the creation was subjected to futility, not willingly, but because of him who subjected it, in hope that the creation itself will be set free from its bondage to corruption, and obtain the freedom of the glory of the children of God. For we know that the whole creation has been groaning together in the pains of childbirth until now. And not only the creation, but we ourselves, who have the first fruits of the Spirit, groan inwardly as we wait eagerly for our adoption as sons, the redemption of our bodies. For in this hope we were saved. Now hope that is seen is not hope. For who hopes for what he sees? But if we hope for what we do not see, we wait for it with patience. Over and over and over again in this passage, the word hope is mentioned. And it's mentioned not in a sentimental way, not in a way that ignores pain. It is mentioned in the midst of suffering and groaning and futility and bondage and pain. That experience is something that we can see and feel right now. As we look around this world and we think about those people who are on the front lines and who have to go into the hospital, who have to go in the grocery stores, who have to go in all of these places and can't stay home safe. We think about people maybe that we know who are suffering with this illness. As we think about all of the people who have died, as we think of businesses that are closing, as we think of the ramifications, the loneliness that so many of us feel, we look around and we know that this world is broken, that this world is not the way that it should be. And it's in the midst of that world that God, through Paul, calls us to hope, to have hope, to look at the things around us and say, this is not the end of the story. There is more to come. The other words that we see a lot are glory. We see that over and over, that we are going to be adopted, that we are going to be redeemed, that we're going to be restored. That in the midst of all of this suffering and pain, we can have hope because we know that the ending is a happy one. You know, it's kind of like in a movie. If you were to watch a movie and you see the main character looks like they're in this worst place, that they're not going to survive, they're not going to make it out. If you were to pause at that point and look and say, hey, there's still 30 minutes left. I know that this is not the end of the story. I know it's going to keep on going and that things are going to get better. The way that we know that is that we already have the down payment in Jesus' resurrection. Jesus rose from the dead. He busted open the tomb and he flipped our world upside down and said, this is not the end of the story. I've broken the back of this awful backwards world. And I am not going to let us continue in this state. And I'm going to redeem it. I'm going to restore it. I'm going to make you my own. And I'm going to defeat sin and death and evil permanently, forever, finally, one day. And this is my promise in my resurrection for you. So the way that ends is that we look at our hope. We look at our situation. We're saddened by it. But we look at Jesus and we have hope. And that gives us patience to know it may not be now, may not be tomorrow, it may not be in our lifetime, but we wait for it with patience, knowing that God will be faithful to His word because He raised His Son from the dead after defeating sin and death and evil. Let that encourage you this week.